Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess Today, in today's episode, we're going to be discussing and talking about the first plague of Egypt. These plagues refer to the 10 plagues of ancient Egypt, as told in the book of Exodus, the Hebrew Bible, the Pentateuch, the Hebrew Bible is said to have been written by Moses. So, the title, The Nile Turns to Blood, a multi-layered divine judgment in Exodus, biblical accounts, analysing the narratives in Exodus, highlighting Moses' confrontation with Pharaoh and the extent of the plague, historical and cultural context, explaining the Nile's importance to Egyptian society, religion and economy. The plague is seen as an attack on the foundations of Egyptian civilization. Theological significance, emphasising Yahweh's supremacy, the poetic justice of the plague. The Nile used to drown Hebrew babies, now becomes a source of death in its narrative function as the first in a series of ecclesiastical judgments. Symbolism of blood, exploring the dual meaning of blood, life and death, and the irony of the Nile, a life-giving source, becoming a symbol of death and corruption. Scholarly interpretations, discussions, both nostalgic explorations, angle blooms, volcanic activity and theological inspirations, divine intervention, critique of Pharaoh's power. Cooperative analysis, drawing parallels with Egyptian mythology and other ancient Near Eastern flood myths. Modern relevance, connecting the plague to contemporary issues such as environmental ethics, social justice, and the dangers of hubris. The analysis includes insights from various scholars, references to other ancient texts, and a series of thought-provoking rhetorical questions designed to encourage reflections on the plague's enduring relevance. The latter additions to the text deepen the original lesson by emphasising co-op mythology and contemporary ethnical applications. Here goes. The introduction. The first plague of Egypt, the transformation of the Nile River into blood, stands as a cornerstone of the Exodus narrative, anticipating anthropological, theological, ecological dimensions. As recounted in Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 to 24, this divine act serves not only as a demonstration of Yahweh's supremacy over Egyptian deities, but also as a poetic reversal of Egypt's oppressive violence against the Hebrews. By targeting the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, the plague dismantles Pharaoh's authority, critiques Egyptian cosmology, and foreshadows the eventful liberation of Israel. This lesson examines the plague's multi-layered impact throughout its biblical accounts, historical context, theological symbolism, and enduring relevance. Biblical accounts and sources. The primary source for the first plague is Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 to 24. Yahweh, God, because Yahweh is the Hebrew word for God, instructs Moses to confront Pharaoh at the Nile, declaring, "Be this, you will know that I am the Lord." Exodus chapter 7, verses 17. Aaron, who is Moses' biological brother, strikes the Nile with his staff, turning its waters to blood. The text emphasizes the totality of the disaster, not only on the Nile but on all the water in Egypt. Even the water in wooden buckets and stone jars become unthinkable. That is taken from the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 19. The plague lasts 7 days, a period symbolising divine confrontation, divine forces. Egyptians to dig makeshift wells for survival, and forces Egyptians to dig makeshift wells for survival. Moses' role as Yahweh's missionary is pivotal. His confrontation with Pharaoh at the riverbank, a site of Egyptian royal power, directly challenges the king's divine presentations. The narrative frames the plague as a contest between Yahweh and Egypt's gods, with Moses embodying the voice of liberation and justice. Historical and cultural context. Egypt's resilience on the Nile. The Nile was Egypt's economical and spiritual lifeline. Annual floods deposited national rich silt for agriculture, while the river facilitated trade and transportation. The Nile's cyclical predictability underpinned Egypt's identity as a stable, divinely favoured civilization. Pharaohs claimed authority as intermediaries of Hapi, the Nile god, and Osiris, whose veins were methodically linked to the river. Symbolic attack on the Egyptian religion. By corrupting the Nile, Yahweh subverts Hapi's demotion and mocks Pharaoh's divine kingship. The plague also targets Cumin, the ram-headed crocodile dog, believed to control the Nile sources, and Isis, the goddess of fertility tied to the river's bounty. The inability of Egypt's magicians to reverse the plague, as according to the book of Exodus, chapters 27, verses 22, underscores Yahweh's unrivaled power. Economic and social collapse. The death of fish, a dietary staple, and the putrid, undrinkable water paralysed daily life. The text notes Egyptians could not drink the water. That's a quote taken from the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 24, forcing labour towards desperate survival efforts. This disruption of agriculture, hygiene, and commerce exposed Pharaoh's vulnerability as a protector of order. Theological significance, divine supremacy. The plague establishes Yahweh's authority over nature and foreign parthenons. Unlike Egyptian deities, Yahweh acts with purpose to liberate Israel and reveal his universal sovereignty. That is again taken from the book of Exodus, verse 7, chapter 5. Poetic justice. The Nile's transformation into blood mirrors Pharaoh's earlier decree to drown Hebrew boys in the waters. And you will know that if you're familiar with the book of Exodus and the story of Moses, then you will know that that Moses was born a Hebrew boy, so he would have been at risk from Pharaoh, because Pharaoh wanted to drown all Hebrew babies, and so the mother of Moses, the biological mother of Moses, sends Moses down the River Nile in a Moses basket. That's where the name Moses basket comes from, and he is discovered by the Pharaoh's sister, and she brings him up as her own child, and he only knows that he only learns that he's a Hebrew himself when he's called to do Yahweh's bidding, if you will. Scholar Newham Sharon notes in exploring Exodus that the river instrumental in Israel's suffering becomes the first medium of Egyptians' punishment, a method of moral thinking, narrative function. As the integral plague, it sets the tone for escalating confrontations. Pharaoh's hardened heart, according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 22, foreshadows the persistent defiance, justifyingly increasing severe judgment. Symbolism of blood. Blood symbolises both life and death in Hebrew theology. As the liquid of life, according to the book of Leviticus, chapter 17, verse 11, its corruption signifies divine warmth. The irony is that the Nile, Egypt's source of vitality, becomes a putrid, lifeless mess. This brutality reflects the plague's deeper message. Egypt's oppressive system proves similarly robust and morally and spiritually bankrupt. Scholarly interpretations, natural explanations. Some scholars propose the plague resembles a toxic algae bloom that reddens water and kills marine life. Historian James Hofmeyr acknowledges such phenomena occurred, but argues that the plague's timing, scale, and abrupt cessation define naturalism. Theological critique. Reducing the plague will at risk dismissing its theological intent. The text emphasises supernatural agency. Aaron's staff, not environmental factors, triggers the disaster. Its 7-day duration and selective targeting that it targets Hebrew water sources remained unaffected, reinforce its nature. Comparative analysis, Egyptian mythology. The plague inverts methods from Egyptian myths. For instance, the bloodthirsty goddess Sekhmet, sent by Ra to destroy humanity, was appeased by dyed beer, resembling blood. In Exodus, however, blood symbolises judgment. No deity can quell. Ancient Near Eastern parallels. Mesopotamian flood myths. For example, the tale of Gilgamesh depicts gods destroying humanity with water, but Yahweh wields water as a precise instrument of justice, sparing his people, a theme echoed later in the Red Sea crossing. You know, the parting of the Red Sea, where the Hebrews are allowed to pass, and when Pharaoh and his men chase after them, they are the departing river closes up, and the Pharaoh and his men are ultimately drowned and destroyed. Modern relevance, environmental lessons. The plague warns against exploiting natural resources without ethical stewardship. Egypt's dependence on the Nile mirrors modern society's vulnerability to ecological collapse from pollution, climate change. Moral themes. Pharaoh's hubris, and this is hubris is a term that's often used in terms of ancient civilizations such as ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt. His refusal to heed divine warnings parallels modern leaders who prioritise power over justice. The plague underscores the consequences of systematic oppression, urging societies to confront exploitation. Conclusion. The first plague transcends its ancient context, serving as a timeless analogy of divine justice and human accountability. By attacking the Nile, Yahweh dismantles Egypt's religious, economic and political foundations, affirming his commitment to the oppressed. This multi-layered narrative invites reflections on humanity's relationships with power, nature, and morality themes as urgent today as in antiquity. One minute, I'm just going. Minute. Right, so here goes. The Nile turns to blood. Right, so here goes. Second part of the lesson. Introduction. The first plague of Egypt, the transformation of the Nile River into blood, occupies a central place in the Exodus narrative, weaving together themes of divine authority, ecological upheaval, and moral reckoning. As chronicled in Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 through to 24, this act of divine intervention is far more than a miraculous spectacular. It's a orchestrated judgment that dismantles Egypt's religious, political, and economic foundations. By targeting the Nile, Yahweh strikes at the core of Egyptian identity, challenging Pharaoh's claims to divinity, smothering the nation's pantheon and exposing the fragility of a society built on oppression. This part of the lesson explores the plague's multifactorial significance through scriptural analysis, historical context, theological symbolism, and its enduring implications for contemporary ethnical and environmental discourse. Biblical account and narrative structure. The first plague unfolds in three deliberate stages, each underscoring Yahweh's sovereignty and Pharaoh's hubris. A divine command and confrontation. Yahweh instructs Moses to meet Pharaoh at the Nile, a sight symbol with royal and religious significance. Pharaoh's scaly ritual of bathing in the river, according to Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 15, symbolised his role as the living embodiment of cosmic order and mediator of the gods. By confronting him here, Moses, a former prince of Egypt turned shepherd, directly challenges Pharaoh's divine authority. The demand, "Let my people go," a quote from the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 16, is not merely political, but theological, asserting Yahweh's supremacy over Egypt's deities. Execution of the plague. Aaron's staff, a symbol of divine authority since its transformation into a serpent. Exodus, again, according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 10, strikes the Nile, turning the waters to blood. The text emphasises totality. The fish in the Nile died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink its waters. That is again according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 21. Even stored water in vessels of wood and stone, materials associated with ritual purity, became contaminated, rendering Egyptian purification rites obsolete. Duration and aftermath. The plague lasts 7 days, a number symbolising divine confrontation is in Hebrew cosmology. For example, Genesis chapter 2 verses 2 to 3. The period of stagnation mirrors the spiritual decay of Egypt's landscape. Meanwhile, the Israelites residing in Goshen remain untouched. Foreshadowing their eventful liberation and reinforcing the theme of election. Historical and cultural context. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline and sacred entity. The Nile was Egypt's quote, its annual indignation governed by the Hellenistic rising of Sirius, deposed natural rich silt that sustained agriculture, enabling surplus grain storage and population growth. Herodotus amply termed Egypt the gift of the Nile. Beyond economics. The river was a celestial axis. The Milky Way was seen as its heavenly counterpart, and the Nile's flow was mythologically tied to Osiris, whose dismembered body was believed to fertilise the land. Pharaohs derived legitimacy from their association with Hapi, the god of the Nile, and Sabet, the crocodile-headed deity of fertility. Right. Theological attacking the Parthenon. The plague systematically targets Egypt's deities. Hapi, the Nile's personification, celebrating hymns for his life-giving floods, is rendered a source of death. Kerman, the ram-headed creator god, believed to control the Nile's sources, the methane is powerless to purify its waters. Isis, goddess of fertility and magic, whose tears for Osiris were said to cause and cannot reverse the curse. Sarbek, the crocodile god associated with the river's ponds, witnesses his sacred creatures perish in toxic waters. The inability of Egypt's magicians to replicate this plague after the initial, according to the book of Exodus, verse 7, chapter 7, verse 22, underscores Yahweh's unrivaled power. Their use of secret arts, Egypt's ritual magic, fails in exposing the limitations of human and divine intermediaries. Social collapse. The Nile's contamination triggered cascading crisis. Economic. The fishing industry collapsed, depriving Egyptians of a protein staple. Agricultural irrigation halted, threatening famine. Health. Contaminated water led to disease outbreaks. Blood in law, according to the book of Leviticus, chapter 15, verses 1 to 12, renders the land ritually unclean. Labour enslaved Hebrews forced to dig temporary wells, again according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 24, gaining a reprieve from brick making, undermining Pharaoh's control. Theological significance: a Yahweh versus Pharaoh, the battle of sovereignty. The plague disintegrates Pharaoh's divine kingship, while Egyptian texts like the hymn to the Nile praise Pharaoh as the one who causes the Nile to flood. Yahweh's actions reveal him as a mortal usurper. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart, again according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 22, a phrase reflecting ancient Near Eastern idioms of obscenity, highlights his moral culpability. Poetic justice and moral the Nile used as a tool of genocide becomes an instrument of retribution. Jewish Midrash notes that Pharaoh's decree targeted male infants while the plague's bloody waters affected all Egyptians, amplifying the Talmud's principle measure for measure. Foreshadowing. The plague's blood method reoccurs in in the book of Revelations, chapter 16, verses 4 to 6, where the third bowl judgment turns rivers to blood as retribution for martyrdom. This insight frames the Exodus narrative as a pilgrimage of divine justice, symbolism of blood. In Hebrew theology, blood gam, spelled D-A-M, embodies life's sanctuary. According to the book of Leviticus, chapter 17, verses 11, and commitment, the book of Exodus, chapters 4, verse 8, its corruption in Egypt signifies the preservation of life under tyranny. Conversely, blood Slavic role in the Passover, the Exodus, contrasts with its destructive use here, illustrating the dual symbolism. Egyptian rituals such as the sheep liberation of blood, red wine, sought to honour the gods, but Yahweh's plague inverts these rites into a god of devotion. Scholarly debate, a naturalist explanation. Some scholars propose the plague resemble. Right, I've done that. We've done that. We've done that. The first plague transcends its ancient context, offering a timeless critique of tyranny, idolatry, and ecological abuse. By turning the Nile to blood, Yahweh dismantles Egypt's illusion of invincibility, affirming his commitment to justice and the dignity of the oppressed. This narrative, rich in theological and ethnical law, remains a pertinent call to align human systems with divine righteousness. Right. The detailed analysis with historical perspectives, the first plague of Egypt, Egyptian cosmology, and the Nile's sacred role. The Nile was the axis of Egyptian civilization, both maternally and spiritually. Its annual induction governed by the god Hapi was celebrated in hymns such as the hymn to the Nile, circa 1000 BCE, which praised the river as creator of all good things. Pharaohs were ritually tied to the Nile's fertility. Coronation ceremonies included symbolic offerings to Hapi, and they were depicted in holding nameless jars to pour liberations, affirming their role as of mediators of divine order. Osiris, god of the afterlife, was mythologically linked to the Nile's life-giving skilt, believed to originate from the dismembered body. The river's renowned mirrored Osiris's resurrection, a cornerstone of Egyptian etymology. The ram-headed deity was thought to mould humans on his potter wheel using Nile clay, while Sarbek, the crocodile god, embodied the river's untamed power. By turning the Nile to blood, Yahweh directly attacked these theological pillars. The plague's 7-day duration, according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 25, averted Egypt's symbolic numerology, while the number 7 represented in Hebrew thought. Egyptian ventured the Hubseed festival, a 30-year renewal of Pharaoh's virtuality, emphasizing province over judgment. Right. Go back. Angle blooms how it can red and water and kill fish, documented in the Nile as early as 3000 BCE. Volcanic eruption. The 1627 BCE eruption of Pharaoh could have deposed iron-rich ash churning water, reddish per Nile studies. However, James Hoffermeyer, Israel and Egypt, notes the biblical accounts specifically blood-like water in vessels transcends natural events. Egyptian magicians' inability to replicate the plague after the initial mercenary underscores its supernatural framing. Archaeological evidence of an abandoned Delta settlement during the Hypnos period hints at upheavals that may have influenced Exodus traditions. The Nile's contamination would have paralysed Egypt's economy. Agriculture, the Pharaoh meant no slick, not for crops. The sheriff irrigation tool and basin farming became obsolete, threatening famine. Hebrew slaves already engaged in brick making were forced to dig wells. Labour from slave and eroding Pharaoh's authority. We've done all this, so. We've done all this. In Gilgamesh, the gods unleashed a catastrophic flood, spanning out. I'll read that. So now I've thought of 15 thought-provoking rhetorical questions for reflection, organised to engage deeply with the essay's argument. So these are just for discussion. So when this video goes out, which will be Thursday, because all my extra slice of history videos, lessons are posted out onto the Butterfly Princess Show Facebook page and YouTube channels every Thursday. So when you listen to some of these questions, which I'm going to read out now, if anyone wants to discuss any of these questions with me, feel free to either contact me via email, butterflyprincess93 at gmail.com, or you can always discuss them with me by commenting on the video itself, or you can send me a message through the Butterfly Princess Show Facebook page. So here are the questions. If Yahweh's plague dismantled Egypt's illusion of invincibility, what modern systems, political, economic, or ecological, might be similarly exposed as morally bankrupt under divine scrutiny? So that's question 1. Question 2. Does the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, according to the book of Exodus, chapter 7, verse 22, absolve him of moral responsibility, or does it magnify the consequences of his pride? What does this tension reveal about free will and divine sovereignty? Question 3. How might societies today replicate Pharaoh's hubris by defying human leaders or systems as infallible attributes of power? Symbolism and irony. Question 4. If blood symbolises both life according to the book of Leviticus, verses chapters 17 verses 11, and divine judgment, what does it mean that the same substance used to mark Israelite doors for salvation, according to the book of Exodus, chapters 12, verse 7, became Egypt's instrument of condemnation? Question 5. Can a society that weaponises its resources, like Pharaoh weaponising the Nile, ever evolve becoming both perpetrator and victim of its own violence? Question 6. 1 minute, I've done that. Question 6. How does the contamination of ritual vessels, for example, wooden buckets, stone jars, invert humanity's attempts to control holiness? What sacred institutions today risk becoming hollow symbols of power, ecology and power? Question 7. If the Nile's cooperation foreshadowed Egypt's collapse, what modern rivers, the Ganges, the Amazon and the Mississippi, might serve as evidence of ecological and moral reckoning? Question 8. When the leaders exploit natural resources for political gain, do they unknowingly invite measure for measure disaster as the Pharaoh did? Question 9. Can a civilization that reduces nature to a commodity, as Egypt reduced the Nile to a tool of empire, ever achieve true sustainability? Theology and depression. Question 10. If Yahweh's liberation of Israel required dismantling Pharaoh's phantom, what false gods must modern societies cast down to free the oppressed? Question 11. Does the selection spring of Goshen challenge us to confront the ethical cost of selective compassion in our own communities? Question 12. How might Pharaoh's magicians, empowered to mimic miracles but not to reverse them, mirror modern institutions that perform activism without enhancing justice? Enacting justice. Modern parallels and ethnical reflections. Question 13. When leaders dismiss warnings of crisis, ecological, social, or moral, are they replaying Pharaoh's fatal defiance? What would it mean to let the people go in today's context of systematic inequality? Question 14. If the Nile's transformation warns against exploiting nature, does humanity's pollution of oceans and skies amount to a global scale plague of blood? And finally, question 15. Can a society that venerates its past as Egypt ventured the Nile ever critically confront its legacy of oppression, or does nostalgia become its own form of idolatry? These questions aim to bring the ancient narrative themes with contemporary ethical, ecological, and political dilemmas, urging learners to reflect on the enduring resonance of Exodus warnings and promises. So, like I said, those questions don't actually have a right or wrong answer. They're just for discussion and reflection purposes. So, like I say, if there's anyone out there who may be watching this lesson when it goes out, and you may want, and if any of these questions have intrigued you, to want to discuss it with me and share your views and, your views and opinions and your insights into any one of these rhetorical questions and reflections, then you, by all means, feel free to reach out to me via the Butterfly Princess Show Facebook page. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that now concludes this week's episode of An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. I hope you've enjoyed this week's lesson about the first plague of Egypt, and I hope you can join me next week for the next lesson in in An Extra Slice of History series. But until then, I'm going to sign off, love you and leave you now, and say all that's left for me to say is take care, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Take care, bye-bye for now.